Jane Austen's enduring legacy lies in her profound insight into the human experience, illuminating the intricacies of love, morality, and social class. Her courageous choice to pursue a writing career, despite the societal norms of her time, sets the stage for a fascinating exploration of her character. In the quaint village of Steventon, Hampshire, on a chilly winter's day, December 16, 1775, Jane Austen was born to Reverend George Austen and his wife Cassandra. The seventh of 8 children, Jane entered a world where family, faith, and social standing were intricately intertwined. Her father, a clergyman of modest means, managed the local parish, while her mother, a member of the prominent Lee family, brought a touch of gentility to their humble household. The Austen family resided in a charming rectory, surrounded by rolling hills and verdant pastures, which would later inspire the idyllic settings of Jane's novels. As a young child, Jane was enchanted by the lively atmosphere of her family home, where music, literature, and conversation flowed freely. Her parents, though not wealthy, encouraged their children's intellectual pursuits, fostering a love of reading and learning that would become a hallmark of Jane's life. The Reverend Austen, an avid reader himself, maintained an impressive library, which Jane would later draw upon for inspiration. Her mother, Cassandra, managed the household with warmth and efficiency, instilling in her daughters the importance of domesticity and social propriety. Growing up among a large family, Jane developed strong bonds with her siblings, particularly her older sister Cassandra, who would become her closest confidant and lifelong companion. The sisters shared a bedroom, a love of reading, and a penchant for creative expression, often putting on amateur theatricals and writing stories together. This early collaboration would lay the foundation for Jane's future literary endeavors. As Jane grew older, she began to appreciate the complexities of her family's social position. While not members of the aristocracy, the Austens were considered genteel, with connections to prominent families in the area. However, their financial situation was precarious, relying on the Reverend Austen's modest income and the occasional assistance from wealthier relatives. This delicate balance between social respectability and economic uncertainty would later influence Jane's writings, as she explored the nuances of class, status, and personal relationships. The Steventon Rectory, with its lively family gatherings, literary discussions, and rustic charm, provided a unique environment for Jane's formative years. As she navigated the challenges of growing up, Jane began to develop her own distinct personality, marked by a keen observer's eye, a quick wit, and a deep love of storytelling. These early years, filled with family, books, and conversation, would shape the course of her life, laying the groundwork for the remarkable literary career that was to come. In 1783, when Jane was just 8 years old, she and her sister Cassandra were sent to boarding school in Reading, a nearby town, to receive a more formal education. This experience, though brief, exposed Jane to a wider world beyond the confines of Steventon, introducing her to new ideas, friendships, and intellectual pursuits. However, the austere atmosphere of the school and the separation from her family took a toll on Jane's health, forcing her parents to reconsider their decision and eventually bring her back home. Upon her return to Steventon, Jane resumed her education under the guidance of her father, who encouraged her love of reading and writing. The Reverend Austen's library, with its extensive collection of literature, history, and philosophy, became Jane's sanctuary, where she devoured the works of prominent authors, including Anne Radcliffe, Henry Fielding, and William Cowper. This self-directed education, combined with her family's lively conversations and her own creative endeavors, helped shape Jane's unique voice and perspective, setting her on a path that would eventually lead to literary greatness. As Jane's love for reading and writing deepened, she began to experiment with her own creative expression, crafting stories, poems, and plays that showcased her wit and imagination. Her family, particularly her father and sister Cassandra, encouraged her literary pursuits, offering constructive feedback and support. The Reverend Austen, recognizing his daughter's talent, even provided her with writing materials, including paper, ink, and a desk of her own. This nurturing environment allowed Jane to hone her craft, developing a unique voice that blended humor, insight, and social commentary. One notable example of Jane's early writing is her collection of stories, known as the Juvenilia, which she penned between the ages of 11 and 18. These tales, often playful and satirical, demonstrate Jane's burgeoning skill as a storyteller and her keen observation of the world around her. In works like Lady Susan and The History of England, Jane pokes fun at the social conventions and literary tropes of her time, revealing a sharp mind and a quick wit. These early writings not only showcase Jane's creative potential, but also offer glimpses into her developing worldview, one that would eventually inform her more mature works. As Jane entered her late teens, she began to take a greater interest in the social scene around her, attending local gatherings, balls, and parties where she could observe the intricate dance of relationships and social hierarchies. These experiences would later influence her portrayal of characters like Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, as she skillfully navigated the complexities of love, class, and personal identity. At home, Jane's family continued to provide a supportive and stimulating environment, with her sister Cassandra serving as a confidant and partner in creative endeavors. In 1793, when Jane was 18 years old, her brother James, who had been studying at Oxford, returned home to Steventon, bringing with him a newfound appreciation for literature and learning. This sparked a renewed interest in intellectual pursuits among the Austen siblings, with Jane and her brothers engaging in lively debates and discussions about politics, philosophy, and literature. The Reverend Austen, pleased by his children's enthusiasm for knowledge, encouraged their explorations, providing access to his library and fostering an atmosphere of curiosity and critical thinking. As the years passed, Jane's writing continued to evolve, reflecting her growing maturity and deepening understanding of the world. In 1795, she began working on a novel called Eleanor and Marianne, which would eventually become Sense and Sensibility. This early draft, though still rough around the edges, demonstrated Jane's emerging skill as a novelist, as she explored themes of love, heartbreak, and social responsibility. The manuscript, carefully crafted over several years, would undergo significant revisions before its eventual publication, but it marked an important milestone in Jane's development as a writer, one that would ultimately lead to her recognition as a major literary talent. As Jane Austen delved deeper into her writing, she became increasingly fascinated with the social conventions that governed the lives of women in her time. Her observations of the local gentry and their intricate relationships would later inform her portrayals of characters like Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth in Persuasion. In 1796, Jane's family experienced a significant change when her father, the Reverend Austen, decided to retire from his position as rector of Steventon. This decision was motivated by his desire to devote more time to his own literary pursuits and to provide a more stable financial future for his family. The Austens began to make plans to move to Bath, a city renowned for its cultural and social attractions, which would offer Jane greater opportunities for intellectual stimulation and social interaction. Before their departure from Steventon, Jane's brother Edward, who had been adopted by a wealthy relative, Thomas Knight, invited the family to visit his estate at Godmersham Park in Kent. This visit, which took place in the autumn of 1796, provided Jane with a glimpse into the life of the wealthy landed gentry and inspired her to explore themes of social class and status in her writing. During their stay at Godmersham, Jane was impressed by the grandeur of the estate and the opulence of the Knight family's lifestyle. She was also struck by the contrast between the comfort and security enjoyed by her brother Edward and his family, and the more modest circumstances of her own family. These observations would later influence her depiction of characters like Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, as they navigated the complexities of social status and personal relationships. In January 1797, the Austen family finally made their move to Bath, settling into a house on Sydney Place. Jane was initially excited by the prospect of living in a city that offered so many cultural and social attractions, but she soon found herself struggling to adjust to the noise, crowds, and lack of privacy that came with urban life. Despite these challenges, Jane continued to write, drawing inspiration from the people and places around her. Her experiences in Bath would later inform her portrayals of characters like Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey, as they navigated the complexities of city life and social relationships. As Jane settled into her new life in Bath, she began to establish a routine that balanced her writing with social engagements and family responsibilities. She attended concerts, plays, and balls, where she observed the intricate dance of relationships and social hierarchies that governed the lives of the city's elite. These experiences would later influence her portrayal of characters like Emma Woodhouse, as they navigated the complexities of social status, personal relationships, and their own sense of identity. In 1797, Jane's writing continued to evolve, as she worked on revising Eleanor and Marianne, which would eventually become Sense and Sensibility. She also began to explore new ideas and themes, including the social conventions that governed the lives of women in her time. Her observations of the local gentry and their intricate relationships would later inform her portrayals of characters like Fanny Price in Mansfield Park, as they navigated the complexities of social class, personal relationships, and their own sense of identity. As Jane Austen continued to navigate her new life in Bath, she found solace in her writing, using it as a means to process her thoughts and emotions about the city and its inhabitants. In 1798, she began working on a new novel, tentatively titled Susan, which would later become Northanger Abbey. This manuscript showcased her growing interest in satirizing the social conventions of her time, particularly the excesses of the Gothic novel genre. Through the character of Catherine Morland, Austen cleverly poked fun at the societal pressures placed on young women, as well as the absurdities of the Gothic novels that were so popular among the reading public. During this period, Jane's family life was also undergoing significant changes. Her father, the Reverend Austen, was enjoying his retirement and devoting more time to his literary pursuits. He had always been a source of support and encouragement for Jane's writing, and she valued his opinion greatly. In 1798, he wrote a letter to a publisher, attempting to secure a deal for the publication of First Impressions, an early version of what would eventually become Pride and Prejudice. Although this effort was unsuccessful, it demonstrates the Reverend Austen's ongoing efforts to promote his daughter's work. Jane's social life in Bath was also expanding, as she attended various social events and gatherings. In 1799, she met a young man named Charles Blackford, who was a pupil of her brother James. Although there is no conclusive evidence of a romantic relationship between Jane and Charles, it is known that they exchanged letters and engaged in lively discussions about literature and life. These interactions likely influenced Austen's writing, as she often drew inspiration from the people and conversations around her. In the spring of 1799, Jane's family made a visit to the seaside town of Southampton, where they stayed with friends. This trip provided Jane with a welcome break from the confines of city life and allowed her to reconnect with nature. During their stay, she worked on revising Eleanor and Marianne, making significant changes to the manuscript that would eventually become Sense and Sensibility. Upon returning to Bath, Jane's family faced a new challenge finding a suitable residence. After some searching, they settled into a house on Green Park Buildings, which offered a more comfortable and spacious living arrangement. As Jane continued to write and navigate her social life, she remained acutely aware of the financial realities facing her family. Her father's retirement had reduced their income, and the family relied on the support of their relatives, including Jane's brother Edward. This sense of financial uncertainty likely influenced Austen's writing, as she often explored themes of economic security and social status in her novels. As Jane's family settled into their new residence on Green Park Buildings, she continued to navigate the complexities of her social life in Bath. In 1800, she attended a series of concerts at the Assembly Rooms, where she likely encountered many of the city's prominent residents. These events provided opportunities for her to observe the social dynamics of the upper class, which would later inform her writing. Her observations of the intricate relationships between families, the nuances of etiquette, and the subtleties of class distinctions all found their way into her novels. During this period, Jane's writing continued to flourish, with significant progress on Eleanor and Marianne now nearing completion. She also began to explore new ideas, including a novel that would eventually become The Watsons. This manuscript, though never completed, showcases Austen's growing interest in exploring the lives of women from lower gentry families who struggled to maintain their social status amidst financial uncertainty. In the summer of 1801, Jane's family made a visit to the seaside town of Sidmouth, where they stayed with relatives. Upon returning to Bath, Jane's family faced a new challenge, the declining health of her father. The Reverend Austen's retirement had not brought him the tranquility he had hoped for, and his health began to deteriorate. Jane, who had always been close to her father, took on a more prominent role in caring for him, managing the household, and supporting her mother. This period of increased responsibility likely influenced Austen's writing, as she often explored themes of family, duty, and social obligation in her novels. In 1802, Jane received a proposal of marriage from Harris Bigwither, a young man from a wealthy family. Although the proposal was unexpected, it presented an opportunity for Jane to secure her financial future and gain a measure of independence. However, after accepting the proposal initially, she later withdrew her acceptance, citing concerns about their compatibility and her own feelings. This decision, though potentially risky, demonstrates Austen's commitment to her own happiness and her refusal to compromise on matters of the heart. Following her decision to reject Harris Bigwither's proposal, Jane Austen returned to her family's residence in Bath, where she continued to care for her ailing father and manage the household. The Reverend Austen's health remained a concern, and Jane took on an increasingly prominent role in supporting her mother and siblings during this challenging period. As she navigated the complexities of family life, Jane also found time to focus on her writing, making progress on the Watsons and other projects that would eventually remain unfinished. In 1803, Jane's brother Henry Austen, who had been working as a banker in London, suffered a significant financial setback when his bank failed. This event had far-reaching consequences for the Austen family, as they relied heavily on Henry's support to supplement their reduced income. Jane's own financial security, already tenuous, became even more uncertain, and she may have felt increased pressure to produce successful writings that could help stabilize her family's finances. Her observations of life in Bath, with its intricate social hierarchies and complex relationships, likely influenced her portrayal of characters and settings in novels like Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. As she walked through the city streets, attended social gatherings, and engaged in conversations with friends and acquaintances, Jane gathered material that would eventually find its way into her fiction. In 1804, the Austen family faced another significant change when they relocated to South Hill, a village in Bedfordshire, to live with Jane's brother Edward Austen Knight. This move marked a departure from the urban environment of Bath and offered Jane a chance to reconnect with rural life, which had been a source of inspiration for her earlier writings. Although the family's stay at South Hill was relatively brief, it provided Jane with an opportunity to experience a different pace of life and observe the social dynamics of a smaller community. As the year drew to a close, Jane's father, the Reverend Austen, passed away on January 21, 1805, leaving his family to navigate the complexities of their reduced circumstances. Jane, now 29 years old, found herself at a crossroads, facing an uncertain future and grappling with the challenges of supporting her mother and siblings. Her writing, which had long been a source of comfort and creative expression, took on added importance as she sought to establish herself as a published author and secure a measure of financial stability for her family. Following her father's passing, Jane Austen's life underwent significant changes as she navigated the complexities of her reduced circumstances. Her mother, now a widow, relied heavily on the support of her sons, particularly Edward Austen Knight, who had taken on a paternal role in providing for the family. Jane, along with her sister Cassandra and their mother, moved to Southampton to live with their brother Frank Austen, a naval officer, and his wife. This new living arrangement allowed Jane to experience a different aspect of life, as she was now part of a bustling household with a young family. During her time in Southampton, Jane continued to write, although the pace of her work slowed due to the demands of her new domestic situation. She began to revise some of her earlier manuscripts, including The First Impressions, which would later become Pride and Prejudice. Her writing was also influenced by her observations of life in Southampton, where she witnessed the social dynamics of a naval town and the impact of war on the community. The Austen family's connection to the Navy through Frank's career provided Jane with a unique perspective on the lives of naval officers and their families, which would later be reflected in her novel Mansfield Park. In 1806, the Austen women moved again, this time to Chawton, a village in Hampshire, where they would live in a cottage provided by Edward Austen Knight. This move marked a significant turning point in Jane's life, as she was now able to establish a more stable routine and devote more time to her writing. The cottage at Chawton became a haven for Jane, where she could focus on her craft without the distractions of city life. Her brother Edward, who had inherited a large estate from a relative, was generous in his support of the family, providing them with a comfortable living arrangement and allowing Jane to pursue her literary ambitions without financial worry. As Jane settled into her new life at Chawton, she began to experience a resurgence in her creative output. She started working on new projects, including Mansfield Park, which would become one of her most acclaimed novels. Her writing was influenced by her observations of the social class system, as well as the moral and ethical issues of the time. The quiet rural setting of Chawton allowed Jane to reflect on the complexities of life and to develop her unique perspective on the human experience. Her relationship with her sister Cassandra, who was also a talented artist, remained close, and the two women continued to support each other in their creative pursuits. As Jane settled into her new life at Chawton, she began to experience a resurgence in her creative output, fueled by the peaceful surroundings and the stability provided by her brother Edward's generosity. The cottage, with its modest but comfortable accommodations, became a haven for Jane where she could focus on her craft without the distractions of city life. Her daily routine consisted of morning walks, reading, and writing, often accompanied by her sister Cassandra, who would work on her own artistic pursuits alongside Jane. The sisters' close relationship continued to be a source of comfort and support, with Cassandra serving as a sounding board for Jane's ideas and a critic of her work. In 1809, Jane began working on Mansfield Park, a novel that would explore the complexities of social class, morality, and personal relationships. The manuscript, which would eventually become one of her most acclaimed works, was heavily influenced by Jane's observations of the social class system and the moral and ethical issues of the time. As she wrote, Jane drew upon her own experiences and those of her family members, incorporating elements of their lives into the narrative. The character of Fanny Price, for example, was likely inspired by Jane's own feelings of being a dependent relative, while the grand estate of Mansfield Park was modeled after Edward Austen Knight's own estate, Chawton House. As the novel progressed, Jane became increasingly absorbed in her work, often spending long hours at her desk, writing and revising. Her sister Cassandra would later recall that Jane's writing process was marked by intense focus and dedication, with Jane rarely taking breaks or engaging in social activities during periods of intense creativity. Despite the demands of her writing, however, Jane remained committed to her family and friends, maintaining a lively correspondence with those close to her and participating in local social events when her schedule permitted. In 1811, Jane's brother Henry Austen, who had been acting as her literary agent, began to make inquiries about publishing Sense and Sensibility, a novel that Jane had written several years earlier. The manuscript, which had undergone significant revisions since its initial completion, was eventually accepted by Thomas Egerton, a London publisher, who agreed to publish the work on a commission basis. The novel's publication in November 1811 marked a major milestone in Jane's career, with the book receiving generally positive reviews and modest commercial success. The publication of Sense and Sensibility brought Jane a measure of recognition and acclaim, with many readers and critics praising the novel's insightful portrayal of women's lives and its nuanced exploration of social class. As news of the novel's success spread, Jane began to receive visits from friends and acquaintances, all of whom were eager to meet the talented author behind the book. Despite the attention, however, Jane remained humble and grounded, preferring to focus on her writing rather than seeking to capitalize on her newfound fame. In the spring of 1812, Jane began working on a new novel, Pride and Prejudice, which would eventually become one of her most beloved works. The manuscript, which was initially titled First Impressions, had been begun several years earlier, but Jane had set it aside to focus on other projects. As she worked on the novel, Jane drew upon her own experiences and observations, incorporating elements of her family's history and social circle into the narrative. The character of Elizabeth Bennet, with her witty repartee and strong sense of independence, was likely inspired by Jane's own personality and values, while the grand estate of Pemberley was modelled after Chatsworth House, the stately home of the Cavendish family in Derbyshire. The character of Mr. Darcy, with his initial pride and subsequent humility, was likely inspired by Jane's own observations of the societal elite, while the balls and gatherings that punctuate the novel were modelled after the similar events she had attended in Hampshire and Kent. Throughout the summer of 1812, Jane devoted herself to revising and editing the manuscript, making significant changes to the characters and plot along the way. In September 1812, Jane's brother Henry Austen traveled to London to negotiate with publishers on her behalf, seeking a better deal for her next novel than she had received for Sense and Sensibility. After meeting with several publishers, Henry secured an offer from Thomas Egerton to publish Pride and Prejudice on a commission basis, with Jane receiving a percentage of the profits. Although the terms were not as favorable as Jane might have hoped, she was eager to see her novel in print and agreed to the arrangement. As the publication date for Pride and Prejudice approached, Jane grew increasingly anxious, worrying about how her work would be received by the public and the critics. Her sister Cassandra, who had been a constant source of support and encouragement throughout Jane's writing career, tried to reassure her, but Jane couldn't shake off the feeling that she was taking a risk by publishing her work. On January 28, 1813, Pride and Prejudice was finally published, and Jane waited with bated breath for the reviews to appear. The initial response to Pride and Prejudice was overwhelmingly positive, with many reviewers praising the novel's wit, insight, and strong female characters. The British Critic, a prominent literary magazine, hailed Jane as a clever and ingenious author, while the Quarterly Review praised her ability to create well-drawn and interesting characters. As the news of the novel's success spread, Jane received congratulations from friends and family members, including her brother Edward Austen Knight, who wrote to express his admiration for her work. She continued to work on new projects, including a novel that would eventually become Mansfield Park, which she had begun several years earlier but had set aside to focus on other works. The character of Fanny Price, with her quiet strength and moral integrity, was likely inspired by Jane's own values and principles, while the grand estate of Mansfield Park was modelled after Chatsworth House, the stately home of the Cavendish family in Derbyshire. Throughout 1813 and 1814, Jane worked tirelessly on Mansfield Park, revising and editing the manuscript as she went along. She also continued to manage her finances carefully, investing her earnings from Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice in government stocks and bonds. As her financial situation improved, Jane was able to enjoy a greater degree of comfort and security, but she never lost sight of her artistic goals, remaining committed to her craft and dedicated to producing works of lasting value. In the summer of 1814, Jane's brother Henry Austen suffered a serious illness, which left him unable to manage Jane's literary affairs. As a result, Jane was forced to take on more responsibility for her own publishing career, negotiating with publishers and managing her finances herself. Although this new role presented challenges, Jane rose to the occasion, demonstrating a keen business sense and a determination to protect her artistic vision. As she navigated the complexities of the literary world, Jane remained focused on her writing, continuing to produce works that would endure for generations to come. As Jane Austen navigated the complexities of managing her own literary affairs, she found herself increasingly drawn into the world of publishing and finance. Her brother Henry's illness had left him unable to attend to her business interests, and Jane was forced to take on a more active role in negotiating with publishers and managing her finances. This new responsibility brought her into contact with a number of influential figures in the literary world, including the publisher John Murray, who would later become a key player in the publication of her novels. In the autumn of 1814, Jane traveled to London to oversee the publication of her latest novel, Mansfield Park. She stayed with her brother Henry and his wife Eliza at their home in Sloane Street, where she was able to observe firsthand the workings of the literary establishment. During her time in London, Jane attended a number of social gatherings and parties where she met many of the leading figures of the day, including the politician and writer George Canning. Despite the demands of managing her own literary career, Jane continued to write with great intensity and focus. She spent long hours working on her latest novel, Emma, which was still in its early stages. The character of Emma Woodhouse, with her cleverness, wit, and occasionally misguided attempts at matchmaking, was beginning to take shape, and Jane was deeply absorbed in the world she was creating. As the winter of 1814 to 1815 approached, Jane's family faced a number of challenges. Her brother Henry's illness had left him unable to work, and the family was forced to rely on the support of their relatives, including Jane's brother Edward Austen Knight. Despite these difficulties, Jane remained committed to her writing and continued to produce works of great insight and wit. In January 1815, Jane's novel Mansfield Park was finally published, and it received widespread critical acclaim. The reviewer for the Quarterly Review praised the novel's strong sense of morality and its well-drawn and interesting characters, while the British critic hailed Jane as a clever and ingenious author. The success of Mansfield Park helped to establish Jane as one of the leading novelists of her day, and she was soon in demand as a writer and a social commentator. As Jane's reputation grew, so did her circle of acquaintances. She began to receive invitations to social gatherings and parties, where she met many of the leading figures of the literary establishment. One of these figures was the writer and critic, Walter Scott, who would later become a great admirer of Jane's work. The two writers shared a deep love of literature and a strong sense of morality, and they quickly formed a close and lasting friendship. In the spring of 1815, Jane traveled to Chawton, where she spent several months working on her latest novel, Emma. The peace and quiet of the countryside provided a welcome respite from the demands of city life, and Jane was able to focus on her writing with greater intensity. As she worked on Emma, Jane began to explore themes of love, class, and social status, which would become central to the novel. As the summer of 1815 approached, Jane's family faced a number of changes. Her brother Henry's health was beginning to improve, and he was able to return to work as a banker. Jane's sister, Cassandra, was also experiencing a period of great change as she navigated the challenges of spinsterhood in a society where marriage was seen as the ultimate goal for women. Despite these challenges, the Austen sisters remained close, and their relationship continued to be a source of strength and support for both of them. In August 1815, Jane traveled to London, where she stayed with her brother Henry and his wife Eliza. She also spent several hours working on Emma, which was nearing completion. As she wrote, Jane was deeply absorbed in the world of the novel, and she was determined to create a work that would be both entertaining and thought-provoking. As Jane worked on Emma, she became increasingly fascinated with the complexities of human relationships and the social conventions that govern them. Her observations of the people around her, from the aristocratic families who frequented the balls and parties in London to the humble villagers of Chawton, provided a rich source of inspiration for her writing. In particular, she was drawn to the experiences of women like her sister Cassandra, who had never married and were forced to navigate a society that often viewed them as incomplete or unfulfilled. In September 1815, Jane's brother Henry, who had been recovering from his illness, returned to his work as a banker in London. His improved health and renewed energy brought a sense of stability to the Austen family, and Jane was able to focus more intently on her writing. She spent long hours working on Emma, poring over her manuscripts and making revisions to ensure that the novel met her high standards. As the autumn months passed, Jane's social circle began to expand once again. She received invitations to dinner parties and gatherings at the homes of prominent families in London, where she met a range of interesting and influential people. One of these was the Prince Regent's librarian, James Stanya Clark, who would later play a significant role in Jane's life as a writer. Clark was a charming and well-educated man with a deep love of literature, and he quickly became a valuable acquaintance for Jane. In November 1815, Jane's novel Emma was nearing completion, and she began to make arrangements for its publication. She had already established a relationship with her publisher, John Murray, who had brought out her earlier novels, Mansfield Park and Sense and Sensibility. Murray was a respected and successful publisher, known for his discerning taste in literature, and Jane felt confident that he would do justice to her latest work. As the winter of 1815 to 1816 approached, Jane's family faced a new challenge. Her mother, who had been in poor health for some time, began to decline more rapidly. Jane was deeply concerned about her mother's well-being and spent many hours caring for her and providing emotional support. Despite the demands of her writing and her social life, Jane remained devoted to her family and was always willing to put their needs before her own. In December 1815, Jane's brother James, who had been serving as a clergyman in the village of Steventon, received an offer to become the rector of a nearby parish. The appointment would bring him a significant increase in income and status, and Jane was delighted for her brother's good fortune. However, she was also aware that the move would mean leaving behind their childhood home and the familiar routines of village life. As the new year of 1816 began, Jane's brother James prepared to take up his new appointment as rector of the nearby parish, a development that would bring significant changes to the Austen family's life. The move would require James to relocate to a new rectory, leaving behind the familiar surroundings of Steventon, where he had served as a clergyman for many years. Jane was sad to see her brother leave, but she was also pleased that he had secured a more lucrative and prestigious position, which would bring greater comfort and security to his family. Meanwhile, Jane's own writing continued to flourish, with Emma nearing publication. She had been working tirelessly to revise and edit the manuscript, poring over the proofs and making final corrections before its release. Her publisher, John Murray, was enthusiastic about the novel, and Jane was confident that it would be well received by the public. As she waited for the book's publication, Jane turned her attention to other matters, including her family's financial situation. Her father's health was declining, and Jane was increasingly concerned about the family's future prospects. The collapse of the bank left Henry financially ruined, and he was forced to seek alternative employment to support himself and his family. Jane was deeply distressed by her brother's misfortune and did her best to offer emotional support during this difficult time. Despite the challenges facing her family, Jane remained committed to her writing, using her craft as a source of comfort and solace. As Emma prepared to go to press, Jane began to think about her next literary project. She had been considering a new novel, tentatively titled The Elliots, which would explore the complexities of family relationships and social status. The idea was still in its infancy, but Jane was excited about the prospect of developing the story and characters further. With Emma on the verge of publication, Jane felt a sense of anticipation and trepidation, wondering how her latest work would be received by the reading public. In March 1816, Emma was finally published, and Jane waited anxiously for the reviews to appear. The novel was released to great acclaim, with many critics praising its witty dialogue, strong female characters, and nuanced exploration of social class. Jane was delighted by the positive response, feeling vindicated in her decision to pursue a career as a writer. As the news of Emma's success spread, Jane's social circle began to expand, with invitations to dinner parties and literary gatherings pouring in from all over London. One such invitation came from James Stanier Clark, the Prince Regent's librarian, who had been introduced to Jane through her publisher, John Murray. He invited her to visit Carlton House, the Prince Regent's London residence, where she would meet the royal family and attend a reception in her honor. Jane was both thrilled and intimidated by the prospect of meeting the royals, but she accepted the invitation with alacrity, eager to experience the splendor of court life. As Jane prepared to visit Carlton House, she was likely aware of the significance of this invitation, given the Prince Regent's reputation for being a patron of the arts. The prospect of meeting the royal family and attending a reception in her honor must have been both exhilarating and daunting, especially considering the strict social etiquette that governed such events. On November 13, 1815, Jane had dedicated her novel Emma to the Prince Regent, which may have contributed to this invitation. It is likely that James Stanier Clark, who had been instrumental in facilitating this dedication, played a key role in arranging Jane's visit to Carlton House. Upon arriving at Carlton House, Jane was struck by the opulence and grandeur of the residence, which reflected the Prince Regent's love of luxury and extravagance. She was greeted by James Stanier Clark, who escorted her through the lavish chambers and introduced her to various members of the royal family. The reception itself was a formal affair, with Jane being treated as a celebrated author and guest of honor. Although there is no detailed account of the conversation that took place during this visit, it is likely that Jane engaged in discussions about literature, society, and culture with the Prince Regent and his courtiers. Following her visit to Carlton House, Jane returned to her family's residence in Hans Place, where she continued to work on her writing projects. Her brother Henry's financial difficulties were still a pressing concern, and Jane may have been anxious about the potential impact on her own financial security. Despite these worries, Jane remained committed to her craft, using her writing as a means of coping with the challenges and uncertainties that surrounded her. As she began to contemplate new literary projects, Jane may have drawn inspiration from her experiences at Carlton House, incorporating elements of court life and high society into her future works. In the months that followed, Jane's social circle continued to expand, with invitations to dinner parties and literary gatherings pouring in from various quarters. Her reputation as a celebrated author had been solidified by the success of Emma, and she was now regarded as a prominent figure in London's literary scene. As she navigated this new world of social prominence, Jane remained mindful of her family's circumstances, using her growing influence to support her relatives and promote their interests whenever possible. The challenges facing her brother Henry, in particular, weighed heavily on her mind, and Jane may have been exploring ways to assist him financially or otherwise. As Jane's social circle continued to expand, she found herself attending numerous dinner parties and literary gatherings, where she engaged in stimulating conversations about literature, society, and politics. One such gathering took place at the home of Henry Austen, her brother, who had recently moved to a new residence on Hans Place. The evening was filled with lively discussions, and Jane was particularly drawn to a conversation with a young woman named Martha Lloyd, who would later become a close friend and confidant. Martha's intelligence, wit, and strong opinions impressed Jane, and the two women quickly discovered a shared love of literature and music. In the spring of 1816, Jane received an invitation from her brother Edward Austen Knight to visit him at his estate in Chawton, Hampshire. Edward had recently inherited the estate from their cousin, and he was eager to share it with his sister. Jane accepted the invitation and spent several weeks at Chawton, where she was able to escape the social whirlwind of London and focus on her writing. During her stay, she worked on revisions to her novel Lady Susan, which she had begun several years earlier. The peaceful surroundings and comfortable accommodations at Chawton proved to be an ideal setting for Jane's creative work, and she made significant progress on the manuscript. While at Chawton, Jane also spent time with her sister Cassandra, who was visiting from nearby Southampton. The sisters enjoyed long walks through the countryside, discussing their lives, families, and literary pursuits. Cassandra, who was a talented artist, brought her sketchbook and pencils, and the two women would often sit together, drawing and writing as they had done since childhood. These quiet moments with her sister were a source of comfort and inspiration for Jane, and she cherished the time they spent together. In July 1816, Jane returned to London, where she was greeted with news of her brother Henry's continued financial struggles. Despite his best efforts, Henry's bank was facing difficulties, and he was forced to take drastic measures to avoid bankruptcy. Jane was deeply concerned about her brother's situation and offered to help in any way she could. She began to consider ways to support herself and her family should Henry's financial woes worsen. One possibility she explored was the publication of her novel, Persuasion, which she had completed several months earlier. Jane hoped that the sale of the manuscript would bring in much-needed funds for her family. As the summer drew to a close, Jane received an invitation from James Stanier Clark to visit him at his home in London. Clark, who had become a valued friend and literary advisor, wanted to discuss Jane's writing and offer his guidance on her future projects. Jane accepted the invitation and spent several hours with Clark, discussing her work and seeking his opinion on various literary matters. Their conversation was lively and informative, and Jane left feeling grateful for Clark's insight and encouragement. In the autumn of 1816, Jane's social calendar began to fill once again, as she attended a series of dinner parties and gatherings hosted by London's literary elite. One such event took place at the home of Benjamin Malkin, a scholar and writer who was known for his witty conversations and love of literature. The evening was filled with lively discussions about politics, literature, and society, and Jane was particularly drawn to a conversation with a young man named John Murray, who would later become her publisher. Murray's enthusiasm for literature and his passion for promoting new authors impressed Jane, and she began to consider the possibility of working with him on future projects. As the autumn of 1816 progressed, Jane's interactions with John Murray became more frequent, and she began to consider him as a potential publisher for her future works. Murray's reputation as a respected and innovative publisher, who had worked with notable authors such as Lord Byron and Walter Scott, impressed Jane, and she was drawn to his enthusiasm for promoting new writers. During one of their conversations, Murray expressed interest in publishing Jane's novel Emma, which she had been working on intermittently since 1814. Jane was hesitant at first, but Murray's persuasive arguments and promises of a generous advance eventually won her over. In November 1816, Jane signed a contract with John Murray, agreeing to publish Emma under his imprint. The terms of the contract were favorable, with Murray offering Jane a £450 advance and a 10% royalty on all sales. Jane was pleased with the arrangement, as it would provide her with a much-needed financial boost and allow her to maintain creative control over her work. With the contract in place, Jane began to make final preparations for the publication of Emma, which was scheduled to appear in print in December 1816. As the publication date approached, Jane's anxiety grew, and she found herself fretting about the novel's reception. She had always been sensitive to criticism, and the thought of her work being subjected to public scrutiny made her uneasy. Despite these concerns, Jane remained confident in the quality of her writing and was proud of the story she had created. In the days leading up to publication, Jane attended a series of social gatherings where she mingled with friends, family, and fellow writers, all of whom were eager to hear about her latest literary endeavors. One such gathering took place at the home of her brother Henry, who was still struggling to come to terms with his financial difficulties. Despite his own troubles, Henry remained a steadfast supporter of Jane's writing and was always willing to offer words of encouragement. During the evening, Jane engaged in a lively conversation with a group of guests, including Martha Lloyd, who had become a close friend since their meeting earlier in the year. The discussion turned to literature, and Jane found herself defending her decision to write about everyday life rather than more grand or romantic subjects. As December 1816 arrived, Emma finally appeared in print, and Jane's nerves were put to the test. The initial reviews were mixed, with some critics praising the novel's insight into human nature, while others found it dull and uneventful. Jane was disappointed by the negative reactions, but she took comfort in the praise of her friends and family, who appreciated the novel's subtlety and nuance. As the days passed, Emma began to gain traction with readers, and its popularity grew steadily, thanks in part to John Murray's effective marketing efforts. In the midst of this literary whirlwind, Jane received an invitation from her sister Cassandra to join her for a winter retreat at Chawton, where they could escape the social pressures of London and focus on their respective creative pursuits. Jane accepted the offer, and in January 1817, she traveled to Hampshire, eager to immerse herself in the peaceful surroundings and work on new writing projects. The siblings spent their days reading, writing, and taking long walks through the countryside, enjoying each other's company and the tranquility of the rural setting. During her stay at Chawton, Jane began to work on a new novel, which would eventually become Sanditon. The story, set in a seaside resort town, explored themes of class, identity, and social status, all of which were familiar territory for Jane. As she wrote, she drew inspiration from the people and places around her, incorporating elements of her own life and experiences into the narrative. The writing process was slow and deliberate, with Jane carefully crafting each scene and character to create a rich and immersive world. As Jane worked on Sanditon, she found herself drawn to the character of Charlotte Haywood, a young woman from a large family who becomes embroiled in the complexities of seaside resort life. Jane's own experiences at seaside towns like Lyme Regis and Southampton likely influenced her depiction of the fictional town of Sanditon, with its mix of fashionable visitors and local residents. The novel's themes of social class, identity, and the rise of the middle class were also reflective of Jane's own observations on the changing social landscape of England during this period. In February 1817, Jane's health began to decline, and she suffered from a range of symptoms including fatigue, joint pain, and skin discoloration. Despite her illness, she continued to work on Sanditon, driven by her creative vision and a desire to complete the novel. Her sister Cassandra proved a loyal and supportive companion during this time, nursing Jane and helping her to manage her symptoms. As the winter of 1817 drew to a close, Jane's condition worsened, and she became increasingly frail. In March, she traveled to Winchester with her sister Cassandra, seeking medical attention from the esteemed physician Dr. Lyford. The journey was arduous, and Jane's health continued to deteriorate, but she remained determined to finish Sanditon. Despite her physical weakness, her mind remained sharp, and she continued to write, dictating passages to Cassandra when she was too ill to hold a pen. In the months that followed, Jane's illness progressed and she became increasingly dependent on her family for care. Her brother Henry, who had long been a source of support and encouragement, played a key role in managing Jane's affairs and ensuring her comfort during this difficult time. As Jane's strength faded, she began to put her personal affairs in order, making arrangements for the publication of her remaining works and ensuring that her literary legacy would be protected. Throughout the spring and summer of 1817, Jane's condition continued to decline, and she suffered from bouts of pain, weakness, and debility. Despite these challenges, she remained remarkably composed, displaying a courage and resilience that inspired those around her. As the end drew near, Jane's family gathered around her, providing comfort and support during her final days. On July 18, 1817, Jane Austen passed away at the age of 41, surrounded by her loved ones in the quiet dignity of her Winchester lodgings. In the aftermath of Jane's death, her family worked to fulfill her literary ambitions, publishing her remaining works and ensuring that her legacy would endure. The novel, Sanditon, though incomplete at the time of her death, was carefully preserved by Cassandra, who recognized its significance as a testament to Jane's boundless creativity and artistic vision. As news of Jane's passing spread, her friends, family, and admirers began to reflect on the remarkable life and achievements of this extraordinary writer, whose works would go on to captivate readers for generations to come. The funeral service for Jane Austen was held on July 24, 1817, at Winchester Cathedral, where she was laid to rest in the north aisle of the nave. The ceremony was attended by her family and close friends, who gathered to pay their respects to a woman whose life had been marked by a profound dedication to her art. As the mourners filed past Jane's coffin, they caught a glimpse of the simple yet eloquent inscription on her tombstone, Jane Austen, known to many by her writings. These few words captured the essence of Jane's remarkable career, which had brought joy, insight, and inspiration to countless readers, and would continue to do so for centuries to come. In the months and years that followed Jane's death, her brother Henry worked tirelessly to promote her literary legacy, publishing her remaining works and defending her reputation against criticism. The publication of Northanger Abbey and Persuasion in December 1817 marked a significant milestone in this effort, as these novels introduced Jane's work to a new generation of readers and helped to cement her position as one of England's most beloved authors. As the years passed, Jane's reputation continued to grow, with her works being translated into numerous languages and adapted for the stage and screen. The Austen family's efforts to preserve Jane's literary legacy were not limited to publication alone. Cassandra, who had played such a crucial role in supporting Jane during her illness, worked to protect her sister's personal papers and effects, recognizing the significance of these artifacts as a testament to Jane's life and creative process. The careful preservation of Jane's letters, manuscripts, and other personal items has allowed scholars and readers to gain a deeper understanding of her writing practices, personal relationships, and artistic vision, providing a rich context for appreciating her remarkable body of work. As the years passed, Jane's brother Henry continued to manage her literary estate, ensuring that her works remained in print and her reputation grew. In 1833, he published a biography of his sister, which helped to introduce her life and works to a wider audience. However, it was not until the publication of her nephew James Edward Austen Leigh's memoir, A Memoir of Jane Austen, in 1870, that a more detailed and personal account of her life became available. This memoir, which included reminiscences from family members and friends, helped to cement Jane's reputation as a beloved author and provided valuable insights into her life and writing practices. Meanwhile, Cassandra Austen continued to play a crucial role in preserving her sister's literary legacy. She carefully preserved Jane's letters, manuscripts, and other personal papers, recognizing their significance as a testament to her sister's life and creative process. In 1845, Cassandra presented a collection of Jane's letters to her niece, Fanny Knight, who had been a favorite correspondent of Jane's. This collection, which included many of Jane's most personal and revealing letters, has since become a valuable resource for scholars and biographers. As the Austen family's archives grew, so did interest in Jane's life and works. In 1884, the novelist and critic Leslie Stephen published an essay on Jane Austen in his Dictionary of National Biography, which helped to introduce her to a new generation of readers. This was followed by a series of scholarly articles and books that explored Jane's life, works, and literary significance. In the late 19th century, the Austen family's papers were gradually dispersed, with many items being sold to collectors or donated to institutions. However, Cassandra's careful preservation of her sister's manuscripts and letters ensured that many of these valuable documents remained intact. In 1925, the British Museum acquired a significant collection of Jane's manuscripts, including the original drafts of Lady Susan and the Watsons. This acquisition marked an important milestone in the development of Austen scholarship, as it provided researchers with access to previously unknown or unavailable materials. Today, Jane Austen's manuscripts and letters are scattered across several institutions, including the British Library, the Bodleian Library, and the Morgan Library. These archives continue to be a rich source of inspiration for scholars, biographers, and readers, offering insights into Jane's life, writing practices, and literary genius. As researchers continue to study and interpret these materials, our understanding of Jane Austen's life and works remains nuanced and multifaceted, reflecting the complexity and richness of her enduring legacy. The final remnants of Jane Austen's personal effects were dispersed in the early 20th century, with many items being sold at auction or donated to museums. However, it was not until 1998 that the last surviving member of the Austen family, Joan Austen Leigh, passed away, marking the end of a remarkable era in literary history. With her death, the direct line of descent from Jane Austen came to an end, but her literary legacy continues to thrive, inspiring new generations of readers and writers around the world. In the years following Joan Austen Leigh's death, there was a renewed interest in Jane Austen's life and works, with numerous scholarly articles, books, and adaptations being published. The 1995 film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, starring Colin Firth and Jennifer Ehle, helped to introduce Jane's works to a new audience, while the 2007 film Becoming Jane, starring Anne Hathaway, explored the author's early life and inspirations. As the bicentenary of Jane Austen's death approached in 2017, scholars, readers, and fans around the world came together to celebrate her life and legacy. The event was marked by numerous exhibitions, conferences, and publications, each offering new insights into Jane's life, works, and enduring impact on literature and popular culture. And so, 2 centuries after her passing, Jane Austen remains an integral part of our literary heritage, her works continuing to captivate readers with their timeless wisdom, wit, and charm. Through her works, she continues to captivate readers with her insightful portrayals of the human experience, offering a timeless wisdom that transcends centuries. As she so eloquently observed, "I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading, and it is this joy of reading that has allowed her writings to become an integral part of our shared cultural heritage." Jane Austen's life may have been marked by modest beginnings and personal struggles, but her contributions to literature have left an indelible mark on the world. Her story serves as a reminder that even the most unassuming lives can have a profound impact on future generations. That's all for today's biography with Plutarch. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that understanding the lives of remarkable individuals helps us better understand ourselves.